operating in a system where there's a salary cap and there's some resource issues. But then you have the Jays operating in there's not many financial controls, but a lot of what Rogers has done there has been on the corporate side, right? And fans have seen prices go up, but they haven't necessarily seen the performance go up. So I think that's where the skepticism comes from.
Yes, and I mean the same can be said even about kind of the same. I mean, really, when it comes to all that side, you've got when it comes to even the Jays from a sense of performance, their only real big pieces have been so far Santander, Anthony Santander, and Jeff Hoffman, really.
Yeah, and you could argue whether either of those are really a huge piece. I mean, I think, don't get me wrong, Santander is a need for the Jays, as certainly being a switch hitter and some power, and it fits a lot of needs. But I think there are some reasons why Santander lasted a bit on the market. Teams were probably hesitant to pony up for a player who's kind of on the other side of his career now, and defensive metrics aren't good. So, and then Hoffman, of course, there were some health concerns. There were 2 or 3 teams kind of walked away from him based on what they saw in MRIs. So, a little bit of risk on both cases. I'm not sure that the Jays are too concerned. They have enough money for sure, and it does plug a couple holes. But yeah, I think Jays fans were kind of hoping for more, and we'll see if there is more. But to start.
It is, and certainly, yeah. I mean, certainly with the trade deadline kind of coming, it's going to be very, very like with the trade deadline too. It's going to be interesting to see how the team performs by then, and seeing where everything sort of progresses there. And yeah, and that's really the piece there as well. Certainly, when it comes down to there's going to be a lot of, I think, still there are a lot of question marks, but yeah, it'll be interesting.
It will, yeah, and I think you're absolutely right on the money there about waiting to see where they're at partway through the year to see what route they go. I think it's no secret they'd like to still add a starting pitcher, and some question marks around who's still out there and how impactful they'll be. There might be some interesting names maybe coming open on the trade market. We'll see. Michael King maybe is a name that came onto the trade market recently that might interest the Jays. But yeah, I think you'll see them desperate to add a starter, I think, before the season starts.
Yes, and yeah, so I'm excited for the season. As long as I'm always excited. And will you be tuned to Locked On Blue Jays this year?
Yeah, of course. I mean, regardless of what's going on with that team, I'm always engaged. I'm always into it. I mean, as disappointing as last year was, we've had some pretty recent years that were good as well. And just as a diehard ball fan, yeah, following Locked On Jays is definitely one of the many sources that I'll be following this year.
Blair and Barker?
Of course, yeah, I love Blair and Barker. I love the honesty that comes from their podcast is terrific.
Oh yeah, Blair and Barker as well. Oh yeah, they're good as well. I like Blair and Barker, and let's start. You know what? Let's talk about the. I want to really get your perspective here. And I did hear some of your comments on the OHL podcast regarding it, but I want to kind of talk a little more deeper now that we've got an official sort of thing about it. Here is what were your what did you think about the Brantford, about Michael Andlauer sending us and you probably saw this coming, the selling the Brantford Bulldogs to the Hyman family?
Yeah, it's an interesting deal, eh? Well, so first off, yeah, as I mentioned on the OHL podcast a few times, like Michael Andlauer was a great owner for that. I mean, he tried everything he could in Hamilton. Yeah, like he did a lot of work in that city when things didn't work out. He set that franchise up really well with some agreements with Brantford and city council and getting the fan base engaged there. And I think the reason this took so long is I think he knew that when he took over the Ottawa Senators, he wouldn't be able to be as engaged an owner in the OHL. So he wanted to move on. But before doing so, he wanted to take his time and make sure he set that franchise up. And that's where the Hyman family comes in. I think he did a good job for that community. And now we hear the 15-year commitment, and probably much longer, we'll see them set up in Brantford. So I think Michael Andlauer was a very good thing for that franchise and for the league.
Certainly, and I think it's been interesting, like to see the whole like that. That Brantford has been committed to the Bulldogs, and I think overall, and I think it's good for that city because the city has had a lot of development.
Yeah, the city's growing immensely, especially out to the west, and when you see that fan base engaged as they are, uh, supporting the prospects game that was there recently, really filling that building. I know it's not a huge building right now, but hearing that commitment to building that new rink there has got to be music to the ears of the Brantford community. I mean, they have a pretty long history in the OHL, and being able to move forward now with a team that they can call their own for the foreseeable future is just great for that city.
Yeah, and very much I think that I mean I feel for the I feel for the city of Hamilton though, where they didn't have much of a uh, where how the Bulldogs ended up how the Bulldogs ended up leaving.
Yeah, yeah, it's I do too. I know, and whenever I hear comments about, well, Hamilton didn't deserve them, they didn't. Well,
Yeah.
there's always a community of fans that do support them,
Yep.
right? And I was a diehard Montreal Expos fan growing up, so say what you will about the size of the audience, there's still a rabid fan base with any of these teams that is disappointed when they leave. And when you look at all the factors in Hamilton, city councils are meant to have different perspectives, and the council looks out for the community. But the problem is with a bunch of different perspectives is sometimes they can just never get on the same page, and they couldn't get behind supporting a few things for that city, including the team. And you never know exactly what they want for that rink there. There's always whispers, is are they setting it up for an AHL team? Is it just for the lacrosse? What is their primary goal here? And there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of honesty with the public. And whenever that's the case, it's the fans that suffer. So I do feel for the junior hockey fans in that community for sure.
Well, and I don't even, and there have been also been rumors about the NHL, that there had been rumors about them wanting to put an NHL team in Hamilton. Now, and I don't think that will work I don't even think that's a very good idea because of the Leafs being in so close proximity, and the Sabres too.
Yeah, certainly the territorial rights were always a huge barrier to Hamilton having an NHL team, but also that rink wouldn't be suitable. It would probably require a new facility. So there's a lot of barriers there. I know dating back a few years now, but Jim Balsillie had initially looked at Hamilton.
Yeah, you had to move the Penguins at one point.
Exactly. Yeah, and if you remember the details of that when it kind of fell through, it was almost a battle of egos. The NHL and Gary Bettman didn't love how he clashed with their protocols. But yeah, so Hamilton has a lot going for it. But yeah, I don't think it's the right fit, certainly anytime soon, for an NHL team.
Yeah, I mean, I think even as a Leaf fan, I wouldn't want to see that. I wouldn't want to see that an NHL team that close to proximity.
No, and it's interesting because I agree with you. I feel the same way, but at the same time, there's all this talk of, well, what about a second team in Toronto? What about a second team north of Toronto in Vaughan or Newmarket, or one of these centers where there's such a population base? And I have a whole bunch of skepticism about that model as well. Not that it would ever happen with the Leafs rights, but yeah, I think there's something to be said for leaving those territories a little bit broad and not encroaching. So I'm with you on that one.
Oh, sure, yes, and but it was the same thing that there were even rumors about. I mean, I don't know if you remember, if several years ago there were even rumors about them wanting to put an OHL team in Waterloo.
Oh yeah, I remember those well.
Yeah, which I think would have been kind of ridiculous, but because they've got the Rangers and the Storm there in close proximity there too.
Yeah, and frankly, I don't think either one of those existing franchises were too enthusiastic about Waterloo. But I heard particularly Guelph was not thrilled about it because there's these drawing areas are relatively broad, and junior hockey relies on fans traveling in to support the team. And so who knows what that would have cost each of those audiences. But yeah, Waterloo, Guelph, and Kitchener is pretty cozy to have three franchises trying to sustain. So yeah, that seemed a little ridiculous despite the enthusiasm of the prospective owners there.
Yeah, and of course, if you want to go a little bit west, you've got the Knights there too. So there's a lot of, and that's also like close proximity. So you don't want too many in like too close proximity there.
No, I mean, there's something to be said for geographic rivals, but you're right. You got London an hour, Brantford less than an hour. You got Owen Sound a little more than that, but you're talking about the city of Waterloo's drawing from rural areas north of the city, which starts to actually encroach on Owen Sound, believe it or not, because Owen Sound has a pretty massive geographic drawing area to sustain that franchise. So yeah, you're right. There's just a little bit too many teams in too close proximity when you start adding another one in that little Tri-City area. So yeah, I just didn't see that as working.
Yeah, and what about the Steelheads? Like they moved from Mississauga to Brampton this year. What did you think of that? And I mean, I don't know if the OH, like really, my honest perspective is that, and I've never shared this on air here, but I think the honest thing is for me, I really don't feel that the GTA market is suited for the OHL. Especially, yes, I get that it's cheaper, but I think like it's cheaper to go to a game if for fans that want to go. But because they have the Leafs there and the Marlies too, if you want to count the AHL, I just don't think it makes a lot of sense.
No, the GTA we know for decades has never really supported junior hockey, even when there was a team right in central Toronto. It's a puzzle, and yeah, there's something about that market that just, it's a Leafs only market. They talk about being a hockey market. Well, it's really not. It's a Leafs market, and the move from Mississauga to Brampton was really, we know the impetus behind that was just a much better arena lease deal. The owners saying, well, if we're not going to get huge crowds, we got to at least cut costs here, and Brampton offered a pretty nice lease deal. But it's a shame that phenomenal rink they have in Mississauga won't host a team of that caliber. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't know that I'm ever going to have much hope in the GTA supporting another junior team, just because how many times do you have to see the proof before you kind of give up on that territory? And I don't know why. It's crazy that the largest urban center in hockey nation can't support an OHL team, but they just don't, and that's the reality.
And I'm sure too that, and like I was listening to the Kitchener Ranger broadcast on Saturday night, this past Saturday, and they were talking about a possibility that there are another rumors floating around of expanding the OHL into Niagara Falls in New York, and I'm like, what in the world is that all about?
Yeah, we talked about that in the OHL podcast this week, and that was born.
Yeah, I'm sure Farwell brought it up this week.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was a story that was made public this week, that basically the OHL acknowledged there was multiple prospective ownership groups looking at Niagara Falls, New York, and there's a bit of a dispute over land where they might build the arena. So it doesn't sound imminent, because obviously a build itself takes a couple years, but they can't even decide on who owns the property. So I don't think that's happening imminently, but I think there's all kinds of reasons why the OHL would want to expand there. And if there's an ownership groups, plural, ready to take over, you've already got two key components there. So just that building would be kind of the final piece. So when that's the case, I see it happening down the road, I got to say.
Oh, definitely. Because I think it'd be very, like the OHL expanding into that market is kind of fascinating, because I think because of its expansion of where it goes and how it sort of, kind of, I mean, I like this idea that they're trying to expand it, but I don't know what the level of expansion is going to do, in a sense. I think because when you have more teams, it kind of creates a little bit of an interesting sort of thing. I think if they had enough teams, I'd love to sort of see. And I said this during that round. I said this at the end of the Memorial Cup round, that I'd like to see. I don't quite like how they do the Memorial Cup tournament. I'd like to see them do that. I would like to see them do it NHL style, like the last. They have the teams from all the leagues from the CHL all participate in the Memorial Cup round, in that final Memorial Cup, for the winner of that trophy. Where I think it'd make more sense to, although I don't know how they would do it, but have each team sort of like they have their own sort of like do it NHL style.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they do change that format. I know there's been lots of questions about the format in terms of having the host there, and are they a legitimate participant, and some of those questions. And there was talk about, well, if there's the USHL has made overtures about, well, what about their champion also participating? So there might be change on the horizon. We'll see. There's always question marks about how they deliver that tournament and what the format is, but it's tricky to do just because all the leagues have their different rules, their different regulations, their different schedules. So we'll see where they go with that, but it might be time to explore something new.
Oh yeah, yep. Yeah, and what about, and we were talking about the Bulldogs a few minutes ago. Wouldn't it be nice to see a catch like the Rangers and Bulldogs kind of be a nice, like, they play each other a bit? It'd be nice if they played each other a bit more.
Yeah, well, that's one thing we've touched on a bit over the last year and a bit on the OHL podcast as well, that realignment seems so overdue for the OHL. And I know that there's all kinds of reasons why they haven't realigned, because there's always a market or a team that's not going to be thrilled, potentially, especially if it's an established legacy market, because the OHL has always favored longevity. So those teams have a bit more say. Having said that, right now it's a bit of a mess, and I can only see it getting messier with expansion. So with that comes the opportunity to get it right and kind of fix some of that alignment, because it seems crazy that a team 45 minutes away is not a team you play more than twice. They're in a different conference. Meanwhile, a lot of those teams, rivals in their own conference, are 7-8 hour bus rides from them. So there's a lot that they could fix with alignment, and I hope this is kind of an opportunity to re-explore that.
Yeah, and certainly, because it'd be very very nice to see that them play each other a bit more. Like, also, we talked about, like, they've got the Generals up there as well in the GTA. So I don't know how they're faring, but that's still in close proximity.
Yeah, well, the Generals, it's funny, they have just enough distance, I think, from the GTA to be their own market, and they do really well. Then relatively new building, which is good for junior hockey, and a really robust hockey market there with there was a lot of car plant workers that established that community who also support the team, and this year in particular they're a really strong team as well. So when they're strong, they're filling that building. So yeah, Oshawa is a pretty robust, classic, established market. So despite their proximity, I kind of separate them from the GTA. They're definitely a junior market.
Yeah, and we'll be checking out this week's OHL podcast. I certainly will, and we'll certainly ensure that all the listeners here do as well. And I mean, now what about now? We talked about the Raptors a little bit off air there before we went on here. That what do you think of Scotty Barnes? Or do you think they're just building around Scotty Barnes now?
Seems to be, and I gotta admit, I've slacked a little bit on my Raptor following this year, just because it's been a bit of a grind with a rebuild and so much else going on in sports. But recently, there's been a bit of an uptick, and we see Scotty Barnes Player of the Week. So that's telltale. He's starting to be a guy that's leading that team out of the woods, maybe, and that's who they're building around. So we'll see where this goes, but it certainly appears as though he's their guy.
Yeah, did you check out Locked On Raptors as well, with hosted by Sean Woodley, who's a friend of this show too?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of in the Locked On network that are really, really good sources of information for the teams. Yeah.
Oh yeah. What are some of your favorite Locked On shows?
Okay, so this is going to get me in trouble because I'm a Habs fan, but I do, I enjoy the Locked On Senators in the NHL just because those guys are so passionate and they bring so much information to the table.
Oh, you like Ross Levitan and Brendan Piller?
Yeah. Like, well, anyone that brings that level of enthusiasm and passion, but also some deep data and info on their team to the table is, I find, very interesting. It's not the sanitized stuff you necessarily get from the major network broadcasts, but it's, if you want to learn what's really going on with the team, those are those sources that you need to go to.
And sometimes you'll get more cover. You'll get like more conversation about the team on the Locked On Network, as far as like, if you whereas if you tune to the Fan and stuff, well, tuning into the Fan these days is not very. It's not really as good.
No, and that's exactly it. So I mean, I have a bit of a theory on that. Like, I think, for one,
let's hear it.
Well, I think distance from the players and from the team is actually important for these conversations. And I think, unfortunately, the major networks and the fans and, the sports nets, sometimes when you're tasked with meeting with these players, interviewing them every day and building a relationship, you're very careful often about what you will say. Whereas I think these podcasts on the teams, they get into the nitty gritty, the positives, the negatives, the just honest assessment. And I find that more often than not, they match my eye test more than when I follow the major networks, just because they're careful, right, about their access to the team and what they have to say. So I find that's a major difference for sure.
Yeah, and sometimes I like to I also like I like to listen to a lot. I like Locked On Leafs. I like Locked On Senators. Actually, I think when you mentioned it, that's when I started listening to Locked On Senators. Back about last year, I think, when you mentioned it to me. And Locked On NHL. I also like. Do you like Locked On NHL as well? Locked On Kraken.
I'm not as familiar with that. I've only heard Locked On Kraken excerpts, and I find it all interesting. It's more a question of like finding the time to follow all these ones.
Oh, that, yes.
Yeah, but you're right. Like, the bits you hear, that's, to me, that's interesting content. It's, like I said, not too sanitized, not watered down, and generally matches the eye test, which I appreciate in any coverage.
I've even listened to Locked On Devils as well.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you mentioned them. I've actually caught up with them more this year than I ever did in the past, and I find actually the Devils have a really strong fan/podcast community. I find you get an awful lot of intel on that team through that,
and
it's nice to
Devils?
see. Yeah, I find a really good source of it, and I find it's very interesting to follow for a team you wouldn't otherwise see or hear a lot about.
Yes, and how do you? And of course, how do you like to listen? Do you like to consume podcasts in audio, or do you like to watch some of them on YouTube? How do you like to consume it?
It's a bit of a mixture for me. Admittedly, if I have the option, I like watching, but I admit more often than not, though, you don't have the watching option. You're in the car or you're multitasking, so it's the earbuds. But so it's a bit of a mixture for me. But I actually prefer the visuals as well if I have the option. But I'd say that's probably 20% of the time.
Yeah, and it's interesting though how YouTube has really taken off for this stuff, and of course, the OHL podcast is also on YouTube as well. But it's interesting that how YouTube has sort of, and of course we're there as well. So it's interesting how it's sort of taken off, and that's the first place people go.
Yeah, it really is. We've noticed just in the couple of years we've done the OHL podcast, a real upwards trend with YouTube for the pod. It's closing in on 1,000 subscribers, I think, and episode to episode a fair bit more. So we're noticing that that's becoming a more popular venue for it, which is great. You get good interaction there as well. And I always joke with Farwell, I'm not sure why anyone would want to see us, but it's still fun.
Yes, and and you know what? And I think it's good that and I know he enjoys doing the show as well. So
yeah, Mike loves it, and he's an old pro at the broadcast game, right? Definitely more than me. So he kind of carries that end of the show. But I think it's a topic the OHL, both he and I have been involved and passionate about for a lot of years. So it kind of flows nicely and naturally to do that format, and it's great that other people find value in it. That's the most impressive part for me. So
Yeah. I think too though, I think he's also like not only has he done that, but he's also like, he's not only a good broadcaster, but he's also a good podcaster too, because he, with um a lot of that, because he took it, took the skills and continued to learn and, learn um he often jokes on his talk show about not being much into the technology, but he really is.
Yeah, I think you have to. There's
Oh, you do,
levels of
yeah.
that, right? Yeah, so like he'll joke about that, maybe relative to some of his really savvy colleagues, but yeah, he's pretty sharp with that stuff. And you're right, it's a discipline that's hard to master, and not everyone does. There's people that have been in the industry for quite a few years that probably still haven't mastered it. But yeah, it's a real skill, and he toggles well
Yeah.
between the two.
Oh yeah. I know he, and he's often joked about it on air about like when he retires and whatnot. He's like, I'm just gonna put the phone. I'm gonna get rid of the phone. And it was funny. I made a joke with him. I'm like, oh, you and I will still connect.
Yeah, I can tell you one thing. He may joke about that, but I don't think Farrell's ever going to stop talking to people. So
Yeah. No, he, honestly, and I think too, and in I think like, in the world that we like see today, I don't really feel that you can do that sort of thing now. Because I think now, given with the way, even not only in broadcasting, but in sort of other sort of areas too, where you have to sort of be like you have to continue to use the devices and keep learning the platforms.
yeah, and that's an interesting point, because I think you hear more and more people talking about the desire to disconnect and move somewhere rural and just detach.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I think that sentiment comes from that, though, is that the world is more and more connected and people are more and more reliant on these things. So the desire to actually disconnect increases, but the reality of being able to decreases. So it's kind of a it's a paradox. I don't think anyone's going to be able to solve, but they'll dream about it anyway.
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, for me personally, like I wouldn't be able to do it, but see, because for me, I'm always like see, and like see, given the nature of you know of what I do and how I do these things, I have to constantly be. I'm always on top of information, and like even a lot going on in the news these days, and you have to sort of, and talk radio and podcasts are really now emerge, and especially podcasts, like there have been a lot of them that have emerged now. Do you have any favorite news podcasts? I like the
Oh,
Front Burner's good.
yeah, for sure. You know what? I think about it. I have a broad range that I go to. It depends on the topic, really. But you're right. There's just so many sources out there right now, and you kind of whittle down to the ones that you like and you trust, and or just depending on what's happening in the world. And what you do is challenging, right? But you do an amazing job of staying on top of information in a variety of different topics and stories, and that's harder to do. And I think when that's the case, and there's so many sources, people sometimes descend into echo chambers and just like the three or four that they agree with and stay there. So I think it's really important to do kind of what you do, and what I encourage everyone to do is expand your horizons, check out different sources, hear more, listen more, and there's so much out there. It's kind of hard to figure out which ones are good or bad at times, but little time investment is required.
Yeah, and you know what I tend to do nowadays is I tend to listen more to the perspectives. I used to read a lot of articles too, but now I think I find myself, and I do the occasional reading still too. I do like audiobooks as well, which is also a good source. I'm an Audible guy, but I think, but it's also like a way to sort of, I find myself also, like paying attention, following information, and just listening more to the perspectives of what's going on and how to, and sort of, and as I do that, it helps me even, you know, talk about things in an engaging manner on this show too.
Oh, absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And Yeah, listening to listening to things you disagree with or that you're not totally in agreement with is valuable. I mean, taking in all perspectives and all sources and taking some time to reflect on it. I find way too many people in this world just want to find other sources that support their worldview or their pre-existing biases and just reaffirm that. And that's where we get into trouble. That's why there's so many extremist opinions. And I think what you're doing, sourcing as much information as you can and pulling the rational pieces from a variety of them and then piecing it together to form your own views. I think that's where people reach a different level of enlightenment.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, and and I think, and also too, I think and I've said this this to you before as well. But I always had a dream of doing a talk show, and now I think I'm finally living that dream.
Yeah, well, we talked about this before. You're right. It's a special skill set and talent to do that, and yeah, which is great to hone that, right? Like, because it takes time to figure out how to do that, how to be good at that, how to find your existence in that world. So kudos to you for putting in that work, because not everyone can do that. That's for sure.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And now being able and now it's also made it easier, like to to bring people in, to have conversations now with, I think, being able to with the platforms that we have to connect. It's made it real easy to have these kind of have conversations with people.
Definitely. And when you do your reach outs, and it's great, people that may not be familiar with your work or with a given source, they can go check it out, right? These things live online, and you can go find past episodes and topics, and then these people can be drawn into that and decide if they want to come on, and all those wonderful decisions that help sustain. So it's great to have that legacy out there.
Absolutely, and I'm looking forward to our next chat, which I hope will be which I hope we can do another chat soon. And you're at Dan Meagher on X and all the other places, Facebook, LinkedIn.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'd love to chat again sooner or later. There seems to be so much news being thrown at us these days,
Yeah,
especially in the sports world. There'll always be something to talk about.
Absolutely, and sounds good. And stick around. I will also be back again real soon today with. Oh man, there is going to be. Oh, I am doing a news show a little bit later on with Becky Coles talking about all over the news. It's going to be crazy, isn't
it? No rest for you, Ali.
No. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be crazy talking about the news.
Oh yeah, seems like the news gives us more crazy stuff every day.
Absolutely, and we will always say, stay tuned. Thank you so much, Dan, for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, Ali. It's a pleasure.
And we'll do it again soon.
For sure.